Hello friends and welcome to McKenna Talks Games. Today we're going to be diving into what is perhaps my favorite RPG setting of all time, Changeling the Lost. For those of you who are not familiar with this game, it was originally published in 2007 under the Chronicles of Darkness line of games. It is getting a second edition this year, which I am super stoked for. So in preparation for that coming out, I thought I would go over the original, refresh myself on the rules and the mechanics and the lore and whatnot. And so when second edition does come out, I can give it the proper, well-informed review that both it and you guys deserve. So that said, this refresher course is not going to be done in one sitting. There is a lot to unpack in this game. And so I thought I'd start off with just going over the generic ideas and themes that go into building the setting and zeroing in on the specific storytelling mechanisms and rule sets in a later video. So let's jump into this fairy ring, shall we? In this game, players take on the role of humans who have been abducted by the Fae, by fairies, and forced to endure years of slavery and exploitation in the Fae realms of Arcadia. And they return home to find themselves changed into something half-Fae themselves, a changeling. And some of them return home to find that they don't have homes to return to. It is very much a game about loss. It is about the loss of identity, about the loss of family, about the loss of a place to belong. And it's also a game about reclaiming those things, of building a new home for yourself, of crafting a new identity, and of putting back together the shattered fragments of a reality that you now know was never as solid as you thought it was before your abduction. It is a really heavy, heavy game, and that's part of the reason I like it so much. I am a huge nerd for any sort of Fae lore and mythology, and it's rare to find media that harkens back to the darker, more ephemeral nature of fairies as they were originally presented. Fairies were never really meant to be cute or kind or benevolent. They could be any of those things if they wanted, if it suited their whims, but above all, they were dangerous, and you dealt with them at your own risk. You might be able to extract a favor from one or bargain with another, but at the end of the day, they were very easy to take offense, and if you offended them, they would make your life a living hell. Now, somehow, the True Fae, or the Gentry as they're called in Changeling, managed to be even darker than the Fae of mythology. The Fae of mythology operated under rules. They operated under systems that, while they didn't always make sense or could seem silly to humans, humans could exploit and take advantage of to protect themselves from the fairies. And while there are rules that the Fae follow in Changeling, the Gentry are the ones making the rules, and they're the only ones who know them. The rules are incomprehensible to humans. The Fae are unknowable, Lovecraftian abominations who rule supreme in the realms that they inhabit. And yet at the same time, those realms are something of incomprehensible beauty that changelings often find themselves longing for long after they've managed to escape back to the human world. Changeling bills itself as a game of beautiful madness, and I think it does a really good job of showing that. Despite the fear and the pain, there is also wonder. There is magic that can be so intoxicating that it makes you forget the trauma you've endured, at least for a little bit. Changelings understand that they live with one foot in reality and one foot in dreams, and they are hyper aware of the fact that they are a hair's breadth from tumbling down a rocky slope of insanity. Given the specific mental and emotional needs of these characters, Changeling society tends to be structured around support systems, dedicated to getting the characters back on their feet and some form of functional. Regionally, changelings organize into freeholds, and freeholds subdivide into courts, which share and cede power throughout the year. Some of these are based on the 4 seasons, spring, summer, autumn, and winter. That is by far the most common, though there are others that operate in different parts of the globe, directional courts, day and night courts, that type of thing. Now, this practice of different Fae courts has its roots in Scottish mythology, which is something I really appreciate. The Scottish had the Seelie and the Unseelie courts, which were also known as summer and winter. And there's also a little bit of Norse mythology in here as well, with the tradition of light and dark elves informing some aspect of the setting, especially the sun and moon courts of Eastern Europe. Now, on an individual level, changelings are organized, well, not organized, but categorized into one of 6 Seemings. Seemings are your templates. They're not quite a class or a race, but they do determine the type of Fae that you are and are informed by the type of labor that you did while you were in Arcadia, and in some cases the whims of your Fae master or aspects of their nature. So you could be a beast, a changeling who has taken on animalistic qualities, perhaps a hunting dog or a songbird. You have darklings who were kept in shadows and shun the light. They could have made their homes in the dank, dark caves of Arcadia, or perhaps they were a spy for their master, relegated to a life of shadows and false identities. You also have elementals who made pacts with the natural forces of the world and became one with them. There are the fairest, the pretty baubles on their master's arms, or the art pieces in their master's galleries. You have your ogres, who, for whatever reason or another, have become huge, hulking, brutish masses of muscle. And you have your wizened, whose menial labor, while unnoticeable a lot of the times, kept Arcadia running and ran those changelings ragged. So that is the sort of basic premise for the game and what type of character you're playing. And there's a lot to like about this setting, but I'd like to just hone in on a few things before getting into some of the less, well, not less savory, but the weaker aspects, I guess, of the setting. So the good things. Changeling is exceptionally customizable. On the player side, you've got your Seemings and also their kiths. And I'll cover this a bit more in my mechanics video, but each Seeming has it has many kiths that you can choose to be a part of. And kiths are sort of basically a subset of Changeling. They determine your specializations and the niche that you fill in Fae society. And they have some really good ideas for them in the book, but you are by no means limited to what is in the book. Homebrew is encouraged. Players are welcome to talk to their storytellers to craft a Seeming and kith combination that is truly unique. And you can take inspiration from anything, from traditional fairy tales to, movies and television and books of today, to religion and mythologies from other cultures. And that's another thing that this game does really well, is that it is super adaptable to different cultures. While fairies and the Fae are a construct of Western mythologies, specifically Celtic mythology, the idea of an otherworldly supernatural being spiriting humans away for unknown purposes is by no means limited to the British Isles. There's actually, in one of the source books, Winter Masks, it details court systems from places outside of the Americas and Europe and gives kith suggestions that are based on folklore from all around the globe. And some of the things it suggests, the quality varies, but you can definitely tell that a lot of heart and a lot of effort was put into making this game something that people of multiple backgrounds and diverse experiences can enjoy. And there's also, by the same token of having super creative options for the players, super creative options for the storytellers, specifically in regard to the setting. Something that I really enjoy about Changeling and also about Chronicles of Darkness in general is the way it places an emphasis on taking your own communities and making them something wondrous or horrific. There is something super intimate, I think, about being able to take your hometown or your college campus and using that as the inspiration for something RPG worthy. You can say, take that old unused railroad track that goes through your hometown. If you follow it far enough, who knows, maybe you'll end up in a forest that's overgrown and covered in thorns, where the echoes of howls haunt your ears and the air smells like blood. Or you could look out at the lake across the street from your college campus, and on the opposite shore, on the night of a full moon, see fairy-lit docks floating and lined with stalls where goblins barter in dreams and sell fate. It is something that, as a GM, even if my players don't necessarily have the same intimate connection that I do with the setting, of course it works better if the players do have that same intimate connection, but as a storyteller, just makes it so much easier for me to get involved and to really sell the atmosphere to my players, which I just absolutely adore. Another thing that this game has going for it is its antagonists. The Fae themselves, I think reimagining as these eldritch things is really clever. The idea of an unknowable, unperceivable horror and evil is already something that our culture is super familiar with, whether it be from authors like H.P. Lovecraft or Stephen King to, survival horror video games. It's there. But what Changeling manages to do is it manages to take positive qualities, beauty, valor, honor, passion, desire, and make those unknowable. The Fae aren't necessarily evil. They have desires that they act upon, but they don't necessarily do it out of a selfishness or a desire to harm. And even those who do desire to harm or to inflict pain aren't doing it because they hate or want people to suffer. They are very much amoral. And I like that. Amorality is unknown. And the unknown is scary. Immorality, on the other hand, you can understand to an extent. You can know where it comes from and see its roots. So, yeah, the Fae are scary, man. And they just work so very, very well. And I also like to give a shout out to another antagonist type in this book, and that is the Fetch. Now, in all my years of playing RPGs and all the systems I've played, I have never found a challenge that is quite as deliciously versatile as a changeling interacting with their Fetch. Now, a Fetch originally in Irish mythology was a shadowy doppelganger that would appear, and it harkened doom for the person who it looked like. Changeling sort of takes this shadow twin a little bit further and makes the Fetch a simulacrum built from a person's actual shadow and whatever bits of Fae crafting material the Gentry had available. The Gentry then leave these simulacrums in place of the humans that they capture. And for all intents and purposes, humans and changelings both see the Fetch as a perfect physical copy of the human who was taken, Whether or not the fetch has the same personality is entirely up in the air and open to interpretation, which is where things get really, really fun. In Changeling society, it is considered a rite of passage to kill your fetch. It is symbolic of taking back your place in the world. And, this can work. The fetch can function as an antagonist, as an agent of the true Fae who made it. Perhaps they're there to keep watch for escaped changelings, to sound the warning alarm when one attempts to return home. Or maybe they're spies within the human world, relaying information back to their masters. But that doesn't have to be the case. Fetches don't have to know that they're fetches. And when a changeling comes a-calling, how scared do you think that fetch is going to be? How confused when a person that shares a face that is so eerily similar to theirs tries to harm them? I am a big fan of creating sympathy for the fetch. I think it's a really good way to make players question their own morals and have them think about how similar to their Fae masters they've become when they go to tear this unwitting double of theirs away from its home and its family. Yeah, I love fetches so. But that's it, I guess, for what I wanted to highlight, and now we'll go into some of the flaws that this game has. The first one is actually kind of minor. It's about the court systems. Their narrative justification, I guess, is shaky. The justification for having a rotating court system is that the Gentry themselves are selfish and could never comprehend of sharing or ceding power with anyone. So when faced with the courts who do this willingly, they can't comprehend them and are thus confused and have no idea what to do. That doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. Just because you don't understand something doesn't necessarily mean you can't try to destroy it or undermine it, and in some cases that lack of understanding could further your antagonism towards the thing. We see that all the time in real life. So I am sort of willing to forgive us a little bit with the seasonal courts, because they do sort of harken back to the traditional court structure with the Seelie and the Unseelie, and they're also just really entertaining. But other court systems, it really doesn't hold up as well. Those are mostly in the supplement books, which brings me to another point, is that some of the supplements for Changeling are not great. It was only intended to have a limited number of supplements when it was first published, but it became such a success that White Wolf added more. And some of the later ones, particularly Dancers in the Dusk and Swords at Dawn, I think introduce a lot of really unnecessary convoluted systems that just bog down a game which can already be really complicated if you're not careful. Then my last criticism of the game is not so much a knock at Changeling as it is the Chronicles of Darkness as a whole. And that is how they deal with portraying mentally ill characters in an RPG. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. It works really well for Changeling thematically. Your characters are basically PTSD incarnate. But what Chronicles of Darkness does is it has the derangement system. And the derangement system takes real life mental illnesses and emotional conditions that people struggle with every day and boils them down to a numbers game, which strikes me as really, really callous. And not only that, but you can buy these conditions away with experience points should you acquire them. Even lifelong uncurable conditions like schizophrenia, and that to me just not only does it not make sense, but it's downright offensive. And the derangement system is tied directly to Chronicles of Darkness morality tracker. The higher your morality rating, the less likely you are to develop a derangement. And at high enough levels of morality, you are immune from developing a derangement. So, yeah. Got major depression? Well, kid, clearly you're just not charitable enough. why didn't you go donate blood or help out at a food pantry? That'll get you feeling better. Because that's totally how that works. Yeah, nah. Changeling kind of fixes this. They do replace the morality tracker with a clarity tracker. Clarity is not so much a system of moral ethics as to how aware a changeling is of the difference between the real and the unreal, human reality versus fey sorcery. And that works a little bit better, I think. Yes, a clarity breaking point can be triggered by a crime, say kidnapping or murder, but those are things that already place extreme mental stress on a person, and they're kind of in the minority. What's more likely to get you to drop in clarity is interaction with aspects of Fairy and of Arcadia that you're not necessarily prepared to deal with again. At high levels of clarity, where you're super aware of the difference between humanity and fairy, something as simple as using magic or seeing fey magic cast could drop you a point. Other examples include going without human contact, prolonged visits to Arcadia, or coming into contact with your fey keeper again. It is not so much a system of what you do versus what you experience. So that, that I can work with. Where Changeling falters is that it doesn't get rid of the derangement system entirely. Now, the way clarity works is that you can kind of house rule it. The way it's written is that it's super easy to portray the effects of a low clarity through RP and through some clever narration on the part of the storyteller. There's actually some really good suggestions in the core book for messing with the player's perception of reality as a way to mess with the characters, anywhere from switching the rules of Changeling to an entirely different mechanic, whether that be rolling a different type of dice or drawing cards, to narrating individual scenes differently for each player so that no one is really sure what goes on or what happened at any particular time. But it just seems to me to be something that you shouldn't have to house rule. But that's getting a little bit too far into the mechanical aspect of things, which I said I will cover in the next video. So I think that's where I'll leave it for now. So when next we see each other, we'll get into the rules and some of the unique systems that Changeling brought to the Chronicles of Darkness universe. And until then, may the RNG bless you with many crits. Thank you for watching.